It is with great pleasure that I introduce our keynote speaker, Allan Kehler. I had the privilege of meeting Allan this past spring at a conference in Toronto and hearing him speak. His dynamic and engaging style, along with his holistic approach to wellness and empowering messages, left me wondering, how can I get him in front of our university community? And here we are today. Al is a highly sought-after speaker who aims to empower his audience to live as opposed to exist. He has spent a significant amount of his life persevering through mental health issues and addictions. On the outside, people saw the man who was president of the school, athlete of the year, and national scholarship winner. However, on the inside was a man who was in pain. A university professor saw beneath the mask and changed Allan's life through a simple process. Al will share this approach in his message with us today. Allan has spent years working as an addictions counselor, clinical case manager, and instructor at several colleges. His genuine appreciation and passion for the First Nations culture led Allan to the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies, where he continues to instruct the mental health and wellness program. His first book, Stepping Out from the Shadows, A Guide to Understanding and Healing from Addictions, has been incorporated into college curricula. Allan's writing has been published in countless national magazines, and he has also been featured on several television and radio programs. Allan currently lives right here in Saskatoon with his beautiful wife and his 4 sons, 2 dogs, and a cat named Hank the Tank. Please join me in giving Allan a U of S warm welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. This topic doesn't always naturally draw people in, and I'll give you an example. I was speaking at a community event that started at 7 o'clock p.m., and it took place in a school library, and I remember at 7 o'clock when that presentation started, and there were 2 people in front of me, and they were the janitors. So we're doing pretty good. This picture was actually taken when I was active in my addictions and when I was struggling with various forms of mental illness, and perhaps some of you can even relate to this idea of smiling on the outside, crying on the inside, where you wake up in the morning, you're in pain, and I mean the emotional kind of pain, but then you walk to your place of work or you walk into the school and somebody walks by you and they say, "Good morning, how are you doing?" And 99% of the time, how do we respond? Good, fine. Next time, try just saying, horrible. What should they do? They'll do that double step. No, you're good. We've become very robotic in not only the question, but also in the response. And for me, the world was always my stage, and I wore this mask. I put on this beautiful smile, exactly like what was read out in the intro. And actually, when I received that national scholarship as an outstanding citizen in Edmonton, I was active in my addictions, and I remember thinking, this is all a joke. This is all an act. It's a facade. I wanted to talk about my pain, but my challenge was I had no idea how to talk about my pain. And this is a very interesting quote. All it takes is a beautiful fake smile to hide an injured soul. Anybody know who spoke those words? It was Robin Williams. And I felt a lot of parallels in that, because fair to say that sometimes we have to wear a mask, but when we repeatedly wear it, is it exhausting? It is. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is obviously there are times when we need to wear it, but ultimately to take the time to remove it and actually look at what's going on inside. Now, I was peppered with a lot of labels, and every time that I was given a label, I felt confined to a box, or I felt defined by the label. One of the big things for me was understanding that the label does not define me, but it also allowed me to understand that similar, or people go through similar experiences as myself, which allows a feeling of liberation and essentially connection. But I remember waiting over 3 months to see this well-known psychiatrist in Edmonton. And I believed that this individual could help restore some peace, I guess, to my life. Well, on the way to the U of A hospital, I stop at Tim Hortons. I get that medium double-double, I put it between my legs. While I'm driving to the hospital, turning left, a car is coming real quick. So I panic, crank the wheel left, squeeze my legs together. Lid pops off. I got hot coffee all over my crotch. Now, not only does that burn, but on that day, I'm wearing beige cords. Beige cords plus coffee, that looks like urine. I'm on the way to meet with a psychiatrist. I'm already feeling shame, fear. I parked underground when I got to the hospital because it's dark. That makes sense. But eventually, I had to face the music. So I remember going up to that main floor. I had one thing on my mind, and that's the washroom. I go into the washroom, and I couldn't recall if it was hot or cold water that removed stains, so I went with lukewarm. And I remember splashing it all on, and it got way worse real quick, because then it started running down my left leg. And I remember I just gave up. This was one of these points in my life that was really a low. And I recall walking down those white corridors and feeling the stairs. But see, here's what's different. I felt as though finally someone could see that there was something wrong with this man, because I recall sitting in countless waiting rooms, and I used to wish and pray that I had a massive gash or something so that people could see that this man was in pain. But as I already alluded to, I had no idea how to talk about my pain. However, things changed because this picture was taken early in my sobriety. That picture, for me, speaks of all those years where I stayed in those shadows of shame, embarrassment, guilt. I firmly believe that our voice is our greatest tool, but why would we talk about our pain if we fear that we're going to be met with judgment? And because I didn't talk about my pain, who suffered more than anybody else? And it's interesting how quick we are sometimes to sacrifice our own needs just so that we can be held in a certain light. Silence will always be that enemy. Now, I want to talk about two key things this morning, and the first one is how to create the space where people feel comfortable asking for what they need, and secondly, to empower you to use your voice in times of need. But to start off with, we're going to have a bit of a quiz. Now, the university here has done a tremendous job. Before I get to the quiz, I forgot to put this in. Now, the three elements, and Chad, you already alluded to this with the holistic approach: body, mind, and life. And I want to start off by just talking about the way in which our systems respond to stress and the relationship that we can have with substance abuse or destructive behaviors. Also talk about the aspect of the mind or the element and the power of thoughts. And lastly, really talk about the difference between existing and living, and hopefully to empower you to live. Yes, now it's quiz time. And here's the first question for you. It's true or false? An alcoholic does not have a drinking problem, but rather a living problem. Show of hands who's going with true. First hand up, coming at you, get ready. Oh, good reflexes. I actually used to hand out metal water bottles, and I only did that once. And I remember I thought the person in the front row was ready because we had connected. And so I grabbed that metal water bottle off the stage, and I did one of these. He was not ready, and I got him right off the head. So yeah, now I use stress balls. Yes, it's true. For myself as an alcoholic, when I stopped drinking, did my problems immediately go away, yes or no? No. Not everybody who drinks becomes an alcoholic. Not everybody who gambles becomes a compulsive gambler. Not everybody who takes Lano cocaine becomes a cocaine addict. My point is this: for years, we believed that the problem always was in the substance, or that there were these chemical hooks. In my personal and professional experience, I believe that not 99, I would say 100% of people who struggle with addictions are in pain, and we lack the tools to manage the pain. Russell Brand, actor, comedian, any of you familiar with him? He has over 10 years of sobriety, and he says this: drugs and alcohol, that's not my problem. Reality is my problem. Drugs and alcohol, that's my solution. When I was active in my addiction, do you think that I feared life, or do you think that I feared death? Life. I had no idea how to live. Second question, true or false? Trauma changes the way that our system reacts and responds. No. Yes, to stress. Who says true? Oh, this one, that first hand up is a little farther back. In the black, right? Black jacket coming at you. Oh, I'm sorry. Should wear helmets. Yes, it's true. Now, how many of you are familiar with the autonomic nervous system? Just show of hands. Okay, well then I'm going to put a little bit of a spin on it, and it will also be a review. So there's two key parts at play here: sympathetic system and parasympathetic system. Let's say you're driving here this morning and a car cuts you off. What happens to your system? Does everything calm down? No. What happens to your heart rate? What happens to your blood pressure? Muscles. This is your fight, flight, freeze. So as soon as there's a threat, this is the sympathetic system that's activated, and it says, get ready. Now, as soon as you realize that that car is long gone and you're safe, it's the parasympathetic system that kicks in and brings you back into a nice state of balance, and everything is calm again. That is a healthy system. Does that make sense? Because here's why it's really important. For people who go through trauma, it changes the way that we react and respond to stress. Now, as humans, we also have the ability to store and suppress trauma in our cells. Sometimes things happen in our life that are so painful that we suppress that because our body knows that should it rise, it's going to be too much or too painful to function. However, then sometimes comes a point in life, if an individual is in a position of strength, support, the body says it's time to release this. I don't have to store it anymore, so it comes to the surface. And this is essentially what happened to me. Because once I was able to experience sobriety, I had strong support around me, these memories started to surface. And I started to recall being sexually abused throughout my entire childhood. And I had no idea that that stuff was even in there. And see, for years, I was always trying to inflict pain upon self. But I never understood why. And then this model gave me insight into the why. Now, obviously, trauma comes in a variety of forms, but I'm just going to speak to it from a place of personal experience with abuse. And as a kid, when that door would open, I could not run. I could not flee. What did I do? I essentially froze. And after these events, nobody would come into the room and say, "It's okay, Al. You need to cry. You need a release." There's no consoling. There's no rubbing of the back. So what happened for me is my system essentially was stuck on, as you can see at the top. I went through life ready. Think of the gas pedal down. Why? Because I had to be. Anytime that a door opened, on guard. Anytime that there's a loud bang, I'm ready. Alcohol. Is alcohol a central nervous system stimulant or a central nervous system depressant? Which one? So for me, running through life, go, 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 the very first time that I drink alcohol, what is going to naturally happen to my system? For the first time, I felt what perhaps people call normal. I felt like I could relax. Now, if somebody has a positive experience from something, do you think that they might take it again, yes or no? And Johann Hari reminds us that addiction is about connection. So I started to rely on alcohol to alleviate some of this pain. I became bonded to it. On the flip side, what can happen is for people who go through trauma, sometimes that system can get stuck off. What does that look like? This is the flat affect. No emotion, isolating, withdrawn, the I don't care attitude. Now, if this individual takes a central nervous system stimulant, so your amphetamines, cocaine, crystal meth, and for the first time, they come to life. They feel alive, like a social butterfly. Do you think that they might take that substance again? And once again, it's about connection. Self-harm, same thing. I was talking to one 15-year-old recently who had pulled out every single eyelash, eyebrow. Why? She's in pain. She's trying to manage the pain. Essentially, we're trying to self-regulate the system. I was speaking at a school in December. When I speak at schools, I often ask for a separate room just so that I can meet some individuals who want to talk to someone that they don't really know. In comes this girl who's 15. She opens up. Her story is quite horrific, one of which includes at a young age her own father was selling her body so the father could fix on his addictions. On and on, age 14, she uses IV drugs. Everybody in the community has seen her as the problem child. Parents don't want their kids to hang out with her, and as a parent, I can understand that to some degree. But then she makes a very profound statement, and she says this. She says, everybody in the community, all that they're seeing is the needle, and nobody sees my pain. Because, man, we're quick to judge. And often, we repel the things we don't understand, whether that's self-harm or addiction, and we push those people away when really what we need more than anything is love, connection, and a new way to essentially bond. Does this model make sense? Okay. So as an addictions counselor, what I heard from a lot of people, and I could personally relate to, is this idea of, well, I use to kill what's within. Well, then the logic behind that is the only way to actually kill what's within is to kill self, which can essentially never lead to healing. And so then a lot of people turn to self-injurious behaviors, self-harm, poisoning, burning. Demi Lovato, actor-musician, has publicly talked about some of her struggles. And she says it very interestingly. She says, I was simply trying to match the outside to the inside. Here's my point. Sometimes we have no idea how to approach these topics. There's a lot of discomfort there. People, for example, who engage in self-harm, they're sending a very clear message, and they are saying, look at me. Something is going on in my life that is so painful, but I don't have the ability to talk about my pain, so I'm going to show you. And if we don't address this proactively, we're doing a disservice to these individuals and ultimately others who are struggling. And I'll show you one of the most effective ways for myself that has been able to open up those doors of communication. And unfortunately, we also lose a lot of people to suicide. We're losing almost 1 million people annually in this world to suicide. And put that into perspective, that's every 40 seconds somebody acts on suicide. True or false? Suicide is not about death, but rather an escape. Who says true? Oh, that was fast. Ready? Ready. Yes, nice. One of the best metaphors that I heard is you think about the Twin Towers in New York City. When those Twin Towers initially got hit by the planes, on that raw footage, you could see people jumping from 100, 200, 300 feet off the ground. Did they want to die? Yes or no? No. What are they doing? Ultimately escaping a painful reality behind them. This picture of Justin was taken a few months before he acted on suicide. Justin was my best friend. Justin was the best man at my wedding, and not more than a year later, I'm giving the tribute at his funeral. This picture is peppered with imagery for me because he wore the mask as I did. We both had a very similar path, struggling with mental illness, struggling with addictions. For whatever reason, I'm still here, he's not. But see, that picture of him all composed, he was a leader in yoga, had his own business, he was always the life of the party. And then behind him, though, you see this fast-moving train, which really depicts the life that very few people knew about. And so he, unfortunately, also struggled in silence. I learned a lot from this loss. I learned how to grieve sober. I would say, though, for me, the biggest takeaway was this understanding that you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. Because I knew he was struggling, and I could have dragged him to the hospital, but I could not force him to stay. I could have dragged him to a counselor, but I could not force him to speak. There's only so much that we can do for the people around us. So what I learned is in those moments where I suspect somebody's in pain, in distress, that I say and do everything so that I do not ever have to look back thinking, should have done more. On the 1-year anniversary after Justin had acted on suicide, I wanted to do some reflecting. So I wanted to drive out and just spend some time at his grave. Before I left home, my wife Tanya says, hang on. Before you go, come downstairs, I made you a gift. So I remember going downstairs, and she hands me this gift bag, and in the gift bag was a picture frame, and it was full of pictures of Justin and I in it together. So good memories. I take this picture frame with me out to the grave, and I recall sitting on the ground, on the grass, and I carefully put this picture frame up, and immediately it slammed down. So the second time that I carefully put this picture frame up, slams down. It wasn't even windy. And the third time that I put this picture frame up and it slammed down, I was mad. And I remember standing up, and I opened my arms, and I said, what's going on? On that day, I heard one word very clear. I refer to it as Creator, whatever your higher power may be. On that day, Creator said, enough. Enough. And I knew what that meant. For me, it meant, enough, Al. You've spent so much time, so much energy thinking about what you could have done that you missed out on the journey that you were supposed to lead in the first place. We cannot take ownership for the actions of others. And when I went back to the college and I was talking to an elder and I said, why him? Why was I saved time and time again? Why are other people saved? And her response was perfect. And she said to me, Al, you have no right to ask that question because he has his journey and you have yours. It's pretty powerful. These are situations, suicide is something that is so deeply embedded emotionally. And sometimes we don't know what to do, how to respond. Well, for me, after this one particular loss, it was like a 1,000-piece puzzle was slammed down on the ground. 500 of those pieces are gone, and we're trying to rebuild, and we'll never get those pieces back. talking is one of the ways in which we can collectively heal. Because, for example, I received a phone call from a school principal recently, and he said, we've lost a young 15-year-old man to suicide. Can you come into the community and address these needs, but please don't allude to the fact that it was a suicide? And I said, man, you got the wrong guy. Like, this is the whole problem. Because are emotions energy, yes or no? Of course they are, and if we do not manage them, they literally become frozen inside. And see, the kids, youth, teenagers, they're all watching, and if we can't put a voice to this stuff, if we can't talk about it, then why would they? And so silence is absolutely not the answer. Another true or false question. You were born to fight. Who says true? Oh, yes, ready? Oh, wow. I got it. Okay, nice. Absolutely, we come into this world kicking and screaming. Now, what's interesting to me is often after a presentation, somebody will approach me, and there's a lot of tears, and they are broken, and they're at that point of potentially staying or going. And they'll say to me something like, what do you do, Al, when you've tried everything? Now, for me, the answer is always the same, and it's you fight. You open your eyes and you look at all the resources and you fight. One of the activities that I'll have clients or students do is a timeline. Now think about this for yourself too. What would your timeline look like if you had to map out all of the lows and the highs that you've gone through, starting from birth to where you are today? Maybe that first low, age 8, parents got divorced. That was difficult. Maybe the second low, age 12, lost a friend in an impaired driving accident. Difficult. After an individual does this, I will say to them, do not tell me that you are not a fighter. Because look at this, time and time again, did you rise above, yes or no? The fact that you are standing here means that you persevered. If they think that they're a fighter, will they fight, yes or no? Yes, because thoughts lead to feelings, lead to actions. The very fact that you're alive means that you have unfinished business. That's very strong. That's one of my mantras. Obviously, there is a reason and a purpose for life. Sometimes we feel as though we have to fix people. So true or false, it is not our job to fix people. Who says true? Yes. Yes. Ready? Yes. Ready. Oh, that's on me. So I want you to think very specifically about how you approach someone in distress. If you walk into a room and there is a woman with her head on the table crying, what do you do? What specifically do you say? What happens if you walk into that same room, but this time it is a male with his head on the table crying? What do you do? And is your response different if it is a woman versus a man? And secondly, should it be different? And I would argue, no. One of the ways in which I found the most effective to open up the doors of communication is this. If we approach people who are in pain and we say, don't mean to pry, I just want to let you know I'm concerned. I just want to let you know I'd be more than happy to listen if you ever needed to talk. That's it. You know why that's so powerful? Because I think that two of our basic needs are 1, see me, 2, hear me. And if you put a statement like this out there, you just said, I see you. And you have now given them an invitation to be heard. Whether or not they act on that invite, is that in your control or out of your control? It's completely out of our control. However, this is a very powerful statement, and it's important to never underestimate the power of this statement. And if you're going to put it out there, then we have to be ready to respond, because sometimes that individual will approach us, and we're busy. We are busy. But if we're answering the phone, if we have to reply to an email, or if we have to run off to a meeting, what's going to happen to them when they finally took a risk to step outside that comfort zone? They're probably going to go backwards. I remember actually finally ready to take a risk. I talked to one of my friends, shared just a little bit of where I was at and what's going on. And he panicked, and he patted me on the shoulder, and he said, you're a good guy, Al. You'll figure it out. And he's gone. And I can understand that because it's uncomfortable, but if we walk into this with the understanding that we do not have to fix, it changes things. The power of 2 ears, 1 mouth for a reason. Because here's what happened for me. When I was in grade 11, 12, In those 2 years, that's when a lot of mental illnesses started to surface, turning towards substance abuse. All the signs are there where I'm changing peer groups. I'm deviating from leadership roles. Academics are sliding. Yet not one teacher approached me. They could talk to my parents, but what's the message that we get when we're in pain and nobody approaches us? That nobody cares. Now, I know that they cared, but they didn't know what to do with me. Years later, at the University of Alberta, it was a professor by the name of Ian McNeil who approaches me. To this day, I don't know why. Somebody asked me last week why. I don't know. Maybe he just suspected that I was one of those individuals who needed to remove that mask and talk. But in a class of more than 300, he approaches me and he says, "Come to my office, Al, let's talk." Okay, so I took a risk. I remember going up to that floor. I walked down the hall, and his office door is wide open. I walk in, there's a chair. He says, "Have a seat, Al." And then he says, "How are you doing today, Allan?" But that's different than the robotic "how are you doing," which essentially is a greeting. 7% of the way that we communicate is verbal. 7%. Where's the other 93% coming from? Mannerisms, body language, tone. Everything about Ian McNeil on that day showed compassion. There was no judgment. He was leaning forward. He was engaged. That was one of the first times that I actually removed the mask and I talked about what was going on. Ian did not fix me. What Ian did is he gave me resources. He essentially put the ball in my court. He said, "Here's what I can offer you." But now it was up to me to choose. Well, I started to write all my exams in rooms by myself. I got note takers. I got tutors. That sucked. That was really embarrassing for me because a few years prior, I was in the top 5% of the faculty for academic achievement. But with struggling with mental illness and addictions, things were spiraling. I dropped out of university. I went to university actually for 7 years. I'm not a doctor. But Ian McNeil provides these resources, and it was at that moment where I realized, okay, in order for me to succeed, I have got to start asking for what I needed. And that became the shift. As faculty, staff, it's the same thing. Every day we're in a position to influence and impact somebody's life. Because there was also a dean, the dean of phys ed at the time at the U of A, Tom Hinch. And he was absolutely influential in my life as well to help me through a lot of those struggles, showing me resources, buying me a little more time when I had to drop out of university. And without those two, I know that my path would have been very different. Sometimes after I give this invite, let's talk. I'll be happy to listen. They're ready. Sometimes they'll fly into my space, my office, or just wherever I am, and I hear kind of a similar theme where they'll say something like this: "Al, you cannot possibly understand what I've gone through." Because their walls are up, but their walls are up for good reason. And if we respond with, "Oh, yes, I can. I went through abuse. I went through divorce," whatever it is. This is not about us, it's about them. And the moment that they start to open their mouth and talk, what happens? Healing. These are the 4 powerful words to respond with in those situations. If we just say, "Help me to understand," watch. Watch, because now there's a shift of energy, and it's on them. And can darkness survive in light, yes or no? Nope. And I believe that darkness begs to see the light of day. Nobody wants to live a life of hiding, of pain, right? Everybody wants to be free from this, but as I said before, they're guarded, their walls are up. And this is one of the greatest gifts that we can give people, our ears. And they just talk. I'm sure you've seen this, right? If somebody just has this innate need to talk, and it just comes out and out and out. Well, for me, the definition of healing is quite simple. It's trying to remove the darkness so that there can be more room for light. Some people are ready. Some people are not ready for change, and that's okay. It's ambivalence. They're on the fence. Fair to say that we cannot force anybody to change, but we can empower people to change. So the way that I do that is through the fork in the road. So I ask you to place yourself at the fork in the road, and I'm going to ask you the $1 million question. And it requires a yes or no response. You don't have to say it out loud. But the question is, are you happy? I mean genuinely happy. In other words, are your behaviors getting you what you want in life, yes or no? If the answer is no, and you play the tape forward, the future is quite predictable. You will not be closer to achieving a life of fulfillment, peace, happiness. If you want something different, you have to do something different, meaning you're going to have to go down a different path. And if you go down a different path, will you stumble? Will you fall? Sure. And you will be required to be vulnerable. But I would say 5% of all of our growth comes from our successes, and the other 95% comes from what? Failures. Why do we call it failures? It's merely experiences. That fork in the road is essentially where I was when I sat across from Ian McNeil, and I had that decision to make. And there are a lot of other variables that assisted me to act on that. I mean, I was pretty tired, and at one point, one doctor gave me a month to live if I didn't change what I was doing. I knew that what I was doing was sending me down a path. But see, there's a big difference between acknowledgement and acceptance, correct? Because I could acknowledge that I had a problem, I could acknowledge that there were a lot of things going wrong, but to accept it requires action, and it required me to actually do something about it. I think that every time you have a challenge in front of you, you have two options. One, you can go around the problem. And if you go around the problem, do you think it will come back to you, yes or no? Sure, like a boomerang. This is exactly where people say, why does this keep happening to me over and over? Maybe it's because you didn't do anything proactive. The shortest way through is always the middle, but that means that you have to feel. So you can fight or you can give up. Now, if I reached out and I choked you, which I would never do, but if I did that, how would you respond? You would fight. I asked a woman recently this question, and she was so mad. She was really mad. She looked at me in the eyes, and she said, I will kick you in the nuts. I was like, nah, it's fighting, sure. So then the follow-up question, I said, okay, what happens if somebody puts your head underwater? What do you do? And she says, I would kick them in the nuts. I said, that doesn't even make sense. You're underwater. Fixated on it. Anyway, the point is, we were essentially born to fight. This is Gloria Mayo. Gloria attended the University of Saskatchewan 15 times between the years 1980 and 2004. 15 times. And she received 2 years of credits. It was in 2012, I believe, 2013, when she entered into my classroom at SIT, determined to be an addictions counselor. She received an assessment. She discovered that she had a learning disability. And she marched across that stage a few years ago. But my point is this, she had a vision, she had a goal, she did not quit. And in fact, I used her story in the last book that I had written, and I remember calling her about 2 summers ago, and I said, Gloria, I would love to use your story in this next upcoming book. I will maintain confidentiality, I won't use your name. And she said, thank you, I'd appreciate that. So we speak for maybe 10 minutes, and at the end of that conversation, there's a long pause. And then Gloria says, you know what, Al? I'm so tired of hiding. Can you please make sure and put my real name in that book? That's what it's all about. Because why would you be ashamed? Why would you be embarrassed of the fact that you fought 15 times and then you came back again? And at the age of 53, you completed that. And do you know where she is now? She's actually at First Nations University finishing her social work degree because she never gives up. And that is what's most admirable. Now, true or false? Time heals all wounds. Who says true? I'm going to say false. And here's why. Time provides us with the opportunity to heal. If we do nothing with the time that we've been given, then healing cannot take place. So I grew up in a small Saskatchewan community, 4.5 roads. That last half road, gravel. I think I was 12. I'm whipping around this corner on my bike. I'm going real fast. I'm going too fast. And I knew that I was going to fall. So while I'm coming around this corner, I feel myself leaning, and then my left arm is being dragged across the road. I'm getting gravel embedded in this wound, and then I fall into the ditch. There's only 3 nurses in the community. What are the odds? The one nurse was actually on her driveway, and she saw this go down. Her name was Joanne. Joanne runs across the road. She lifts me out from this wreckage. She leads me into her home, into the washroom. I sit on that closed toilet seat, and then she gets out the peroxide. Then she got out the scrub brush. And lastly, the Q-tips. Oh, I remember sitting there while she poured that peroxide in. I screamed. Now, this is what she did next, which I don't know if it's medically professional. I'm not a nurse. She took that scrub brush and she went to town. I screamed again. And then lastly, she took the Q-tips and she got every last bit of gravel out. But what did Joanne do? She cleaned the wound. And if you have a clean wound, you cannot stop that process of healing no matter how hard you try. This is the same thing with emotions. If we're willing to stop running, if we're willing to slow down, go within, be with our pain, and if we start to face that anger, shame, sadness, you cannot stop that process of healing. But is it painful to slow down and go inside and do some of that work? It is. For me, it was incredibly terrifying. In fact, I moved at one point 14 times in 7 years. And eventually I reached that point of understanding this, the problem was never outside of self. The problem was always within. And only once I stopped running, once I was open, honest, doing the work, could healing be possible. True or false? Just because you're living does not mean that you're alive. Who says true? Yes. Yes, it is true. Coming at you. Ready? You have an NFL shirt, so I knew it. I knew it. Well done. Now, fair to say that there's a distinct difference between existing and living, because to exist is easy. It's like being on autopilot. We don't step outside of our comfort zone, we don't take risks, and therefore we do not grow. A timeline of what it looks like for me, for an individual who goes through life existing, looks like this, where you're born, go to school for a very long time, perhaps have a career, have a family, have some kids, you retire, and then you die. Riveting. When did you live? Osho says this. He says, the question is not whether life exists after death. The real question is whether you are alive before death. So I had an opportunity to coach Special Olympics floor hockey when I lived in Edmonton. I've coached a lot of different teams, but no team had this mentality where they viewed the world as though everybody loved them, and in turn they loved everybody else. And it was refreshing. So I recall taking them to Calgary for a provincial tournament. And in that first game, we were getting destroyed. I mean destroyed. We were losing 27-0. As a coach, I own none of that. I put that all on them. The game's almost over. Glenda, one of my athletes, comes up to me and she says, "Hey, coach, are we winning?" I'm like, really? Really? But she's waiting. Her eyes are big, and so I said, yes. Yay! She ran all around the gym. And I thought that's how it should be. However, not all of them took this loss too well. Some of them were a little stressed, a little frustrated. You know what they did? They turned to food. I recall going back to the hotel. I opened up one of the rooms. Half of my team was in there, and they were all eating steak and potatoes. And I said, "Guys, what are you doing?" "Oh, coach, room service, it's free." "Oh my gosh, no, I gotta pay for that." But it wasn't their problem. These individuals became some of my greatest teachers in some of those darkest years. Now, when I say surround yourself with others who speak your language, here's what I'm getting at. No matter what you're going through, I promise you that there are other individuals who are going through similar experiences, because the moment that we isolate, the moment that we feel as though we're alone in this, it gets darker and darker. And we literally have to get ourselves out from the dark into the light. I had to get myself into some pretty difficult, uncomfortable situations. I was also a compulsive gambler, along with being an alcoholic. And that first 12-step meeting for GA, I remember sitting in my car in an Edmonton church parking lot crying uncontrollably, because I knew that if I opened up that door and I walked into that building and I talked about what was going on, it was real. I was able to navigate through some of that, but for me, nothing was as difficult as getting myself into the Saskatoon Sexual Assault Center for other men who'd been sexually abused. And I've only started talking even publicly to the fact that I experienced abuse maybe a year and a half ago because, the shame behind that was so suffocating. And that's, I guess, essentially what shame does. It keeps us silent. Now, I can't explain through words the emotions that I felt before I went to that meeting. I believe it was one of the first meetings of its kind for men. Somehow I get myself into this room, and there's only one other man. So that didn't help because I already felt so much shame. The counselor starts off by just a general, maybe let's talk about what brought you here. So I tried. I probably talked for, 20, 30 seconds tops, and then I just broke. I gave up. Then the only other man who's there, he says the 6 words that saved my life. He says, "It's okay, Al. I get it." There is nowhere in the world that I could have gone to receive that gift. Nowhere. We have to take incredible risks sometimes to receive the ultimate reward. It is for this reason that Brené Brown says the 2 most powerful words are me too. Why? Connection. And in that moment, I was no longer alone. I knew that there was somebody who actually understood me. And that was huge in alleviating a lot of that shame and in allowing myself to be vulnerable, open and honest, and start to talk. Took one. So sometimes I'll go into communities after there's been trauma, or sometimes somebody will say, well, where I live, there's a need, but the group doesn't exist, and my answer is always the same, and I say, start one. When I was in Edmonton, I started my own 12-step program around gambling, because that was something that there was so much shame around as well. So I pay a pastor to rent out his church basement once a week. I put up flyers all over the U of A campus. I put up flyers everywhere. Somehow global news picks it up, and there's this media campaign. I was so convinced that this meeting was going to be a success. You know those carafes of coffee? I had 2 of those. I had tea. I bought cookies. I had sugar creamers. I had all the literature. I remember sitting in that room. The meeting was supposed to start at 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, it's me. 7:15, it's just me. 7:30, it's just me. I'm buzzed off caffeine. Nobody came. So the next week, I only made half as much coffee. And then it's still me at 7 o'clock. Nobody's there. 7:15, I heard footsteps. I'm like, oh my gosh. You know who it was coming down the stairs? It was the pastor of the church, seeing if I was legit. He didn't even want coffee. So then it's just me again. The 3rd week, it's probably like 20 after 7, and I heard footsteps again. I wasn't sure if it was the pastor again. No, a woman appears. Well, she's probably expecting to see a room full of people, and it's just me. So she books it to run up the stairs, and I'm like, oh, hell no. I waited this long. So I didn't physically grab her or anything, but I was able to get her back into this space, and it was awesome. 2 people. But we talked about something that we had in common where there was shame and there was healing that took place. And guess what? The next week, there was another person. The next week, another person. And this is my point. I promise, if you create a space around a common theme, people will come. And when people come, healing will take place. And this is how we can collectively heal as schools, communities, society as a whole. I went through life with the victim mentality. I had the V on my forehead. Now, I remember sitting across from an elder, and he said, Al, you are not the only person who struggled with mental illness. You are not the only person who struggled with addictions. You are not the only person who's been sexually abused. If you want something different, go get it, because this world owes you nothing. I was pretty mad. I was really mad. But then I go home, and I'm chewing on some of this. I'm thinking about it. Well, is there merit in what he's saying, yes or no? He could have said it nicer, but sure, there's truth in that. So that became one of those catalysts for change as well, where I started to understand, okay, this victim mentality is useless, it's dragging me down. And so that helped fuel getting myself into places like the Saskatoon Sexual Assault Center, getting myself into different support groups, continuously talking about what was going on instead of just suppressing and keeping it within. And because of that, this is what I've been blessed with. that is so powerful for me. Like, that is so mind-boggling. Because just over 8 years ago, which is not that long ago, I was still active in my addictions. I was living on my own in Edmonton. I did not have friends by definition. There were a lot of lonely nights. There were a lot of dark times. And had somebody said to me, hang on, Al, one day you are going to have a beautiful wife. One day you're going to have 4 healthy kids. One day, Al, you're going to have a home, not a house. As if. But it's interesting how things change when we start to go within and do the work. And we set up boundaries and remove some perhaps unhealthy people. Call it law of attraction, call it what you will, but then like-minded individuals come. And it is ultimately up to us to choose the life that we want to lead. So in closing, I want to leave you with this mantra. Now, if you live with this, it means you will continuously be in a state of living opposed to existing. And so my wish for you is that you will continuously be challenged, but never defeated. Thank you so much. I appreciate you even coming out. And I also have a gift for the university. Chad, I'll present this to you. This is for the whole team, though, everybody. It just, to me, signifies unity, strength, people coming together around a common theme. Simone, I asked her to design this with the children as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll leave this with you. Thank you. You're welcome.
Well, wasn't that amazing? I want to thank Ray Lynn for having the vision of bringing Al here today. She saw the possibility, and I think we've all felt that today. Thank you so much for teaching us, for sharing with us, for having the courage to share your story, and for the key messages that we'll all take away, no matter where we're at, and each of us is at our own place, but you really showed us, I think, that we all have hope, we all have opportunity. We all can get to where we'd like to get to if we follow some of the direction and advice and learn from experiences of people like yourself. So please join me again in thanking Allan Kehler. All right, with that, we'll conclude. Wish everybody the best of days. Be well. Thank you for coming.